So I was going to talk about just basic linear periodization today. Nothing too fancy, just kind of want to go over the basics. And then I actually have um, a sample program that I've made before for a football team in New York when we were doing some remote training. But just want to go over the real basics that, as you can see, you want to start off with low intensity. I'm just going to use here a new lifter. Let's just say it's a new lifter, age appropriate, and just did a good solid 5 rep max. Let's just use that as an example. During their first week or so, I'm going to make this into a 4-week block here. You want to start with the intensity low. We want to always work on the hypertrophy, right? So we're going to try and grow the muscles. We want to strengthen the tendons. We want to strengthen the ligaments and everything like that. We don't want to jump right into the strength and the power, because if they're a young individual, a new lifting or new athlete, we want to make sure we progress them slowly. So we're going to do higher volume, lower intensity, just that we can get a lot of, or like if we're going back to Dennis the other day, we're going to increase their work capacity, right? So we're going to, right now in the hypertrophy phase, this area here is going to be the bottom of my pyramid. We're going to be growing the work capacity. That way, when we go up higher and higher, we're going to be able to perform. We're going to be stronger, more explosive, reduce injuries because everything's going to be strong. A lot of people, when they start, they're going to have the intensity a little bit too high just because they want to get going. But you don't want to rush over that, because your muscles are getting stronger, but we also want to make sure that our tendons are getting stronger, our ligaments, and we don't want to have any type of imbalance in there.
So to pause you there.
Yeah.
So what would you then consider a correct starting intensity based off that 5 rep max? What is your parameter for a correct starting intensity? Let's say for squat, you got a 5 rep max on squat. It's 200 pounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what would you consider a good starting intensity?
I would probably do 60 to 65%.
Okay.
If it's a new athlete or a new, just someone who's working out in the gym. Because if you do, based off of this example that I have, if you're starting with like 8s and 10s or 12s, if you work at 60 to 65% for 3 sets of 10, you're going to be pretty smoked.
Yeah.
Just because it's something that they're not used to, especially if they're coming from a non-structured training program, going right into structured, where before they might be going, oh, well, 100 pounds feels heavy this week. But if they're based off of a 200 rep max, they're going 60%, 120 pounds, they want to be going at 120. That difference in the 20 pounds for the 10 to 8 rep range is going to destroy them, And I think being able to start low and then progress from there is going to be good. What do you think? What do you guys think you would start at? Jesse, you're muted.
I realized as I started talking.
Yeah.
I was saying, yeah, I'm muted. I have, so I'm going to see if I can share my screen.
Let me make you a host as well. I'll do that real quick. I think John, you'll probably have to unshare your screen so Jesse can share his.
Okay, so
nice. I got the same printer.
So if you look at this is just a sketch. It's not necessarily exactly what I'm going to do, but I kind of got to get in here a little bit. You can see at the very beginning of cycle 1, there's a 14 rep range, which is, you're probably thinking that's stupid high. And then cycle 2 starts at 12 reps, 3, 10, and it kind of scales down from there.
This is extended from your St. Francis one, right?
Yeah. And then there is a dynamic effort block where if we're in these cycles, we're not even doing dynamic effort. And then there's what I would do on the Olympic lifts. So I brought this up because, like, for beginners, yeah, we'll probably start up at the really high rep range and give a volume and a lot of opportunity to work on their technique. But if I'm working with somebody more advanced, I might start down at cycle 3, for at the beginning of my
Right.
So so that's not necessarily an absolute, that's a sketch of where I might start, and then an idea of what percentages at most the highest percentage I would prescribe.
Right.
Now, if I'm working with an absolute beginner and we're doing 14 reps, I have no idea what their max is.
Right.
So that number in there is kind of academic, but at least it gives you an idea of what percentages you're working at. But another reason I wanted to bring this up is because I have been experimenting with here and there, starting people more like 5 reps and doing lots of sets to give them an opportunity to get in and out of the rack and practice at a lower volume before I put them at the beginning of this.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. It's a skill. Like learning how to get in and out of rack and rack things well is a skill, and you're giving them more opportunities to practice that skill.
Right. And throwing somebody who's an absolute beginner right in at 14 reps or even 12 or 10 reps can be a lot. So it gives them an opportunity to move. I mean, they're still not going to be lifting a lot of weight. I mean, they're not going to be doing, what do I have here? 87.5%. They may be only doing 70% at 5 reps just to practice the movements, learn how to load bars, learn how to get in and out of the rack. So 4 sets of 5, that sounds like a strength, like an advanced strength program, but it can be useful for a beginner just to give them practice. I know it sounds funny maybe, but just to give them practice at being in the weight room and moving the weights before they go into something that's fairly intense, doing 1 week at 14 reps, another week at 12, and then another week at 10, a lot of volume. It's going to be a lot of accrued soreness. So helps them get over that hump a little bit before I throw them into that. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, because it kind of builds them confidence too, because if they've never done a squat properly before, even at all, then just doing a 5, they kind of get understanding without being too fatigued. That way, because at 14 reps, I mean, my form would break down also. So if you have a brand new kid, we're just using a brand new kid, but having like the 5s, the 6s as like the cutoff is, we do it sometimes with some of my kids too, who are new but not like never been in a weight room before,
Right. And keep in mind that if somebody's on this program, the movements they're doing are goblet reverse lunge or half kneeling kettlebell press, that aren't very technically difficult anyway.
Yeah.
They're just accruing the volume there, the basics before we move them on.
So I got 3 things. My first thing is, this is a quick answer. The dynamic where you have the nose. I think me and you had a discussion about that whenever you were at St. Francis, because you started playing with not allowing dynamic effort stuff until they reached a certain competency with the lift. And then the second thing is, so you mentioned it here. Actually, I'll do the second thing. I think, John, you mentioned like a young lifter, that's tough to do. 14, but also think about an advanced lifter. Right? An advanced lifter, 14 reps at 55%. That's still going to tire me out. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what because my 55% is now so much of a higher absolute load, you know what I mean, rather than a relative load. So I think that's a good point to just make too, is that these numbers, while are academic, I mean, that's the art of what we do is we also have to manipulate them the right way to be able to achieve things. Now, Jesse, you mentioned like these 14, 12s and 10s in this first cycle might not be a bilateral back squat. It might not be, it's very foundational unilateral lifts that are helping them create a lot of this just accumulation of volume.
Exactly. That's why you can never look at something like this. Like, I hate to even put it up because it's like somebody's going to look at this and, oh, why are you going to do 14 reps at 55%?
Yeah.
Exercise selection is a huge factor into what the heck that cycle one is going to look like. I mean,
right. And the third thing I was going to ask you then is, so my programming now is all volume based, and then I assign percentages based off of the overall volume. So that being said, depending on what cycle we're in, I'll have a total volume for the day of, look, I want to get a squat pattern in at 30 reps, right, for the day. Depending on where we're at in the year, like I'll put those 30 reps either 6 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 10, depending on what I want to get out of it. How do you, when you look at this, and how do you kind of back it into your whole overall volume rather than just looking at it? Because looking at it, again, like it kind of goes to the point you just made, like just looking at this without having any type of context, you're like, you're just going to do one set of 14, you know what I mean? Like one set of 12, one set of 10 each. So like, how do you build that into your bigger volume?
right. So I don't have a sheet like this that is going to demonstrate that, but you know, if you're looking at 14, 12, and probably 10, you're doing 2 sets. As you start getting into maybe down here in cycle 2, you might do 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 8. So the number of sets kind of increases as you go along, or the number of exercises.
Right.
Like 3 sets of 10 here, you know, isn't like 6 sets of 5 here. You might do 4 sets of 5 on one exercise and then do another exercise to keep the volume up. So again, exercise selection, number of sets, as well as exercise selection, number of exercises, all comes into play as far as the total volume.
Yeah. And Jesse, to be 100% transparent with you, I have your St. Francis one of this still. And so when I program my volume, when I program my programs, I have my overall volume that I want to hit in whatever movement pattern. And then I pull up this sheet of yours, and then I kind of put them together. And I'm like, all right, so we are in the second cycle of our strength phase. So I'm going to be in that 5-6 cycle of yours for what I'm doing. So these are the percentages I'm going to look to hit. And this is how I'm going to achieve my overall volume of, say, 40 reps. I'm going to achieve it in sets of 4s and 5s rather than sets of 10. But it's going to be more of a more vertical sets rather than horizontal sets. So yeah, I mean, I utilize this too a lot of the one you had at St. Francis, just because it just gives me a reference point. And like you said earlier, this isn't your hard, steadfast, this is what I adhere to. This is just a reference. And I think it's a good point to make, that you use this as, here, this is what the overall scheme is going to kind of similarly follow this, but it's not exact.
Right. Like, for example, to go off what you just said, like, it's a reference point, it's a scheme, it's not exactly what I'm going to do necessarily. I'm not going to band somebody up and make them do 14 pull-ups. They may be doing 3 pull-ups in this stage as a beginner.
Right.
So, you know, again, exercise choice, what the context of the exercise you're doing plays into how this applies. You know, those pull-ups, I might do 3, 4, 5 even in those 3 weeks with a beginner, you know, maybe more sets, just to try to because as a beginner, they're probably not very competent at a pull-up. They're probably going to have to use a band. And so that's just one example of how I'm not going to follow this for a certain exercise.
Yeah.
Do you guys follow Prilepin's chart at all?
Somewhat.
That's one that I've found to be really, I use it a lot as a reference point, not exactly like follow it to the T, but I found that one because again, it gives you a little bit more freedom where you can say, okay, we're going to work in 65%. It needs to be these total amount of reps with a little bit of guidelines back and forth, but you don't have to kind of do 3 to 12 or, you know, so it kind of gives you a little bit of freedom depending on, again, the exercise that you're doing and everything like that. So
I kind of use it like how Chad did, Jesse, at St. Francis. I use it a lot for my dynamic efforts. It gives me a really good baseline of what my volume needs to be for dynamic effort work, where I'm only going to be working at anywhere from 50 to 70%, period. We're not going to go anything over that. And you're barely touching 70% ever within that. So, but I use that as like a reference, just to be like, all right, here's what I need to touch on. Here's how many sets I need to get and how many reps I need to do to even elicit a response at this load. And I think that's the thing that we got to bring up too, is that it has to be the effective dosage to elicit the response that we want to elicit. We can't be, if we're not looking for hypertrophy, or if we're looking for hypertrophy, then we're not going to get it out of your week 7 and beyond, your cycle 7 and beyond, because
Right.
you're not doing enough for hypertrophy. So a lot of this is so like when you look at this, it's subjective because it's varying, especially in your guys' realm. It's varying based on, you could have 4 athletes in one session that are all in different parts of this cycle because of where they are athletically, where they are in terms of their training age, where they are in reference to their season. Like there's so many different variables that go into how you even begin to look at this.
Right. And something I wanted to point it out here, you mentioned that I have no here and no here. But also you have to be advanced to be able to do this and experienced to be able to do this. And, you know, I might let you do it as a beginner. If you've gone through all those cycles and you get here, maybe you can do it here. You know, I consider there's going to be people that are going to look at this and be like, 6 reps dynamic, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it depends is the answer. You know, it depends is always the answer. Yeah. The context of what you're doing and who you're working with. So again, you're
not West Side.
Right. And this is just a thumbnail sketch of what I might do.
Right.
Not an absolute, this is what we're doing at each phase.
That's cool. I like that a lot.
Yes, you'll probably have to unshare your screen to get back to John's.
Okay. Yeah, that's been years in the making.
Yeah, I think every time I've seen it, it's been slightly different.
Right.
It looks so different compared to the one that I have from when mine's probably from when I interned at St. Francis. Right. Not from when I GA'd. And even the difference between when I interned to when I GA'd, which is only a 1-year span, it changed.
Right. So when you're looking at the chart that's on the screen now, then, you know, obviously that cycle 1 is a high volume, low intensity. More hypertrophy. I would also put anatomical adaptation in there for hypertrophy, depending on who you are.
Yep.
If you're an experienced lifter doing that cycle, you're going to be moving more weight and you're going to get hypertrophy. If you're a less experienced lifter, it's going to be more anatomical adaptation. And like you said, Dennis, earlier about the neurological adaptation, you're learning the movements. And then as that moves through the cycles, it gears towards the strength and power. Sorry, I took over.
I mean, we could always touch on, like, I'll show you guys when we get later on. I'll show you the mock-up that I have, and then we can kind of talk about different parts of this being incorporated into an actual workout. So it's not just you're only doing hypertrophy for today for the next 4 weeks, and then you're only going to do strength for the next 4 weeks and only do power work, kind of how we'll get there when we get there. But here's just another simple linear periodization model. So as you can see, the couple different weeks here, we're just slowly increasing, slower. Deload week. I like to personally do a deload week probably after week 4 with my kids, just because
after week 4 or as week 4.
After week 4.
Okay.
So I'll give my kids probably a good month. Now they probably won't obviously follow the exact percentages, but just showing you how we slowly improve here. I like to give them a deload probably after the first month or after a month of training, just because they're trying to balance all of their other sports and activities and practices and everything like that, depending on where they are in season or off season. I've done with the kids who just ended football season. I'll probably take them 6 to 8 weeks before I do a deload with them, just because the first 2 weeks is pretty much them getting used to the weight room again. And they're not competing and everything.
I think it's interesting because, I mean, I love this conversation about like a 3-week upload, 4th week deload, 4-week upload.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually, in our summer programs for football, our returners, I gave them a 5-week cycle, then 2 4-week cycles, because that's how the math ended up coming out for our season or for our summer. And I utilized the first week as what I would call like a reload week instead of a deload week. So it's a lower volume, lower intensity week, just kind of getting them moving again, and then built from there and then deloaded after that. But I think it's really interesting that, I mean, I think it also has to work for your system too. Like your deload when you, I am on a train of thought now in my programming that I'll deload even if it's not a programmed deload week. Like if I look and our team looks hammered and sluggish, then and it's towards the end of the week, which is where my volume starts to kind of drop off a little bit, and they're still sluggish, then I'm gonna end up chalking it, redesigning our lift, and be like, look, we're jumping to a deload week next week because you guys look like you need it, and then kind of using that visual feedback on that. But that obviously doesn't follow that linear periodization model. But it's just interesting to talk about.
Personalized. I think is something that's important because
good coaching.
Yeah, but like even for me, when I make programs, not only because we're in the private sector, but I don't like doing annual or 6-month programs. Just because if you have a perfect program where you want them to hit X amount percentage on week 6 and week 3 they sprain their ankle, now your whole rest of your program is going to have to change because there's so many different factors that go into play that I personally don't stick to anything more than 3 months is usually as far as I'll go.
So I do 4-month plans. Like I'll do basically a quarterly plan, or a third of the year plan, whatever. But the only thing I do in my succeeding, I fully program my first cycle, and then cycle 2 and cycle 3 and cycle 4, they're loosely programmed. So I just know where the numbers are supposed to go in terms of just the overall stuff. And then I don't put an exercise to it or anything, or even, I don't even put it to paper yet. I just have it in a file that shows me, all right, here's the X amount, here's the volume for the cycle, here's this for the cycle, here's the intensity of the cycle, here's where I want to go, and then I modify as we get there. Because if after the first cycle, I don't think they're going to be able to handle the volume of the next cycle, I'm going to drop the volume of the following cycle just because I don't want them compounding the already beat up bodies that they already have at that point.
Right. So after this example here, I can show you kind of following these percentages here. This example program here is I just have the max protocol here. But if you see like the front squats, I have them hitting. So I like to do, if I do test, it's going to be a 3 rep. I think it's a little bit safer for the kids, just because they're not going too heavy, I guess would be a simple way to
Not
put
going
it.
to the point where any form breaks down. And if they
Yeah.
start to, we can call it on rep 2 and not have them grind out the 3rd rep. So for at least our population, it's easier because they want to go more and more and more even after form breaks down, and we don't let them.
That's what they're taught to do by Instagram and Twitter.
Right.
They just get the weight up.
Right. Oh gosh, painful.
So here, if you see, like we're just gonna use front squats again here, I kind of follow this here. So we're gonna hit 75%, 80, 85. So we're slowly increasing. And then also, so 70% here, but if you notice 3 sets of 10 on the front squats for week 1, week 2, drop into 8s, increasing the intensity. So the percentages aren't going to be exactly how I follow them, but I'm just kind of showing you how we're going from
65, 75,
65,
80.
slowly improving while we're decreasing. So we're going back to here where we're going to drop the volume, increase the intensity over time. So just following the simple 4-week here, just slowly, so 4 sets of 5. Again, dropping the reps and then increasing the percentages that we're hitting
Right.
before we test, just to kind of elicit that response where we want to kind of keep them progressing, let them taper down a little bit, and then progress again even more.
Which
Here's
is
a
the
question.
point behind periodization.
Your deload then, how does that factor into that model then? Like,
so my deload, I know there's a couple different ways. I don't know what ways you guys do it. So I know either you can drop the intensity or drop the volume.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the kids, I like to usually drop the intensity, just because after 4 weeks for a new lifter, they're pretty smoked and they're feeling it. So, or I can just say, even with the powerlifter that we had who competed in nationals, and you can just tell after 4 or 5 weeks or so, if you do a deload, I want to keep the volume there. So instead of doing here, where I'll drop down to maybe like 2 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 5, I'm going to actually drop them down closer to this here. That way I can let them rest. They're still going to go through the motions. They're still going to hit everything that they need, where I can kind of manipulate the tail end of their workout, but let them kind of recover a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, the only reason I ask is because you alluded to it. Like, there's 2 really like thought processes towards deload. Is either shut down the volume or shut down the intensity. And one that I was introduced to is kind of shutting down both.
Uh-huh.
But it's only shutting down both for your more advanced lifters. Your younger lifters, it's more of a shutdown of volume and keeping the intensity within like a strength range. But once you get to a higher degree of lifter that can handle more load more regularly, it does decrease both. But in general, it just decreases the volume. But it was really interesting to me because I was, for a short period of my career, I was always into, if you deload, then you got to raise the intensity. So you're going to be that's when you're going to be hitting your heavier loads is on your deload week, because your the volume is shut down. And then so essentially I would use every 4 weeks as a quote unquote test week. And but it would be testing at 85%, 90%, 95%, and 100%. Like, it'd be a spread across a 16-week cycle. You know what I mean? So I was interested to see how that fit in there for you, because it's definitely something that like a lot of people just view it completely differently, but every way works as long as it fits your system. And it, like Jesse said earlier, it depends.
Right, and I'm more of a decrease the volume, but it depends, because if you're cutting volume that implies that you want the person to have a fairly large recovery during that week. And you can keep intensities either very high, like Dennis was just talking about, or just slightly reduced, again, depending on the person you're working with. But it's easy to recover from high intensity work if the volume is really low. So if you keep the numbers in a strength phase, again, like Dennis was just talking about, keep the numbers in more of a strength phase, drop the volume way down, do a couple sets of 3 or something at 80, 85%, you will keep the strength, but have a huge opportunity to recover. So if you're in the middle of a season with a football player who's beat up, you really need that low volume model. But if you're working with a youth athlete, they still need the volume to keep the training, the training response.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point to make too, is like the way I approach like in-season training is like a deload. I keep the intensity relatively strength to power, like keeping it relatively high, but the volume is so low. And I talk about that in like recruiting visits and stuff. Like when kids ask me like, what do we do in season? I say we lift heavy in season, because think about it this way: like if you squatted 500 pounds in the off season and you never touch it at all in the in season, you're detraining, because you're never feeling that, you're never needing to elicit that response in terms of the training. So now will I have you squat 500 pounds in season? Probably not, unless you get immensely stronger because I mean it's not out of the realm of possibility to get stronger in season as long as it's managed correctly. But like you said, you have the deload can't be so low in intensity that you're essentially detraining them. Because if you do both and you cut the volume and you cut the intensity, then they're going to end up being slightly detrained that week because they haven't felt that. And then the next time they get back in the weight room with you on a regularly programmed week, 80% is going to feel massively heavy because they haven't felt it in a while.
What are your thoughts on taking their deload week as more of just like a speed week? Doing like just plyometrics, ballistic exercises, tempo work, stuff like that.
So that is 100% how I don't call my deload weeks at all. I call them speed weeks. Because and it goes back to what I talked about. I keep my intensity in like a low to moderate strength intensity, and the volume is pulled back so much that I can get a dynamic effort out of them at that intensity. So I don't necessarily do as much ballistic. I don't add more ballistic work in or more speed work in, but I want them to move the barbell faster.
Right.
That the deload week, like if we went from a phase where we were squatting for 6s with like a 3-second count down to now all of a sudden this 4th week, I'm telling you we're squatting 3s with no tempo, you should be able to move that weight so much faster because now we're taking away the tempo. You should be a lot more refreshed in between sets. The total time under tension is dropped down immensely. So that's actually how I phrase my deload weeks, is I call them a speed week. When especially with like football, if we come in, I'm like, look, guys, it's speed week. Like I need you guys to move the bar with maximal intent, because that's how we're going to make the most out of this volume. Even though it's way less volume, we're going to make the most out of this volume.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing with the kids. I have them drop a little bit just so they're not struggling with the weight or anything. But then I tell them, focus on speed, focus on perfect form and speed as quick as you can. That way you can still see the benefits of everything without overstimulating. So.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, because I also think too it's interesting because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make these athletes perform better on the field.
Mhm.
So where a lot of our, when we talk about the force velocity curve, a lot of our stuff to make them a better athlete and make them more explosive as an athlete has to stay in that strength speed to speed strength range. Power's within that range, but very rarely, unless you're a sprinter, are you ever getting to max velocity in a game, in any type of playing scenario. And then very rarely are you ever going to be feeling the same amount of load that you feel underneath an absolute strength.
Mhm.
So when we talk about like a speed week, it's basically giving them a chance to take all the strength that they used and then apply it the best way they can to be fast and be explosive and be powerful.
This is just an annual plan example that I have. The easiest would be just to say football player ends final games here. You can kind of see if we're following a true, like in a vacuum, a full 25-week linear periodization model, kind of going through the hypertrophy and the acclimation phase, just because they're coming out of the season. So they have to kind of get everything acclimated again. So you can kind of see here again, 10s, 8s, 12s. So we're keeping the intensity down, like we're here, intensity's down, volume's up. And then you can just slowly see that we're kind of going higher, 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 stronger, working in strength, and then peaking them for the season. So this is a real basic, slow build-up to the season is what I have here.
So explain where you have 2 4-week cycles in the beginning,
Mhm.
and then you have a 4-week cycle,
And deload.
and then deload, and then a 3. So the deload is the beginning of your next cycle.
Yeah, like after this 12-week phase here, deload.
Okay.
3 weeks, you're going to kick up the intensity a little bit.
Deload.
And also, I think if you're going pretty intense with everything here, you're going to need a deload.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
deload, get stronger, deload, work on power, quicker movements, again, speed on the bar.
Yeah. No. And then talk about your peak. Like, how does your peak look? Does it look like a deload week, or how does that look?
Peak would be power phase-esque. And that's where we would start working on speed, like pure. I like to do pure speed on the bar, getting them to be really explosive with the movements. Maybe you're working, if you're doing an Olympic lift, or a squat or anything, I like to keep it roughly 75 to 85%. That way they're getting quick. Or I'll incorporate a lot more plyometrics or more ballistic work in here. So like what you would do for a speed week is what I would kind of compile together to make 2-week speed to get their body ready.
Now, do you drop volume from, like, say, week 24 to 25?
Yeah.
So
and then I would get them ready for.
Gotcha. So that's really similar to like the last 4 weeks of like my football summer cycle. It's actually an inverted linear periodization.
Mhm.
It's strictly linear. I'm sorry. It's strictly linear. Whereas an intro would be, it would be like a low volume, slightly higher volume, highest volume deload, where it would go build up this way. My enter into the season is highest volume, slightly lower volume, and then even a deload at the end of that. But our deload is where I put a lot more emphasis on the ballistics, the speed, all of that stuff. That cycle gets more speed work in terms of field work, rather than conditioning, rather than like strength work. Like, it's a peak, so that way. And I don't like using the word peak with long sports seasons, because technically you're not trying to peak them. So like when I talk to like track or swimming, I talk about peaking because I want to make sure they're peaking at the right time, that they're the most explosive, the best they're going to be at this meet. Whereas football, they have to sustain that peak. It's more like a plateau. Like you want them to plateau a little bit and be able to be at the highest point of the plateau for the longevity of the season.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. I mean,
And you can also kind of look at the tempos here. So we're going slow, a little bit of eccentric here with a pause, slowly going quicker. So again, a hypertrophy, we're going to hop back into that slow eccentric. And you can see here we're going quicker, strength going quicker. And then the power phase, we're working on explosiveness.
right.
So kind of what you were saying, just working on speed, dropping the tempo that you were working with before to kind of get the bar moving.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, this is awesome.
So that's based off of like a 4-day program, if you see lower and upper here.
Yep.
So, and then as you know, the heavier we go, we're going to want to have a little bit of more rest in between, let the body recover before we move on to the next movement.
Yeah, that's a good point to make too. Is that, I mean, if you're trying to work on hypertrophy or work capacity, you're going to lower the rest in between, and you're going to keep the volume relatively high and force the body to build its base. And then as you get that base built, then you can start shifting into utilizing more of a true 3-to-1, 2-to-1, 4-to-1 rest ratios. So.
Yeah. Jesse, how does it look?
I like it. It's a little hard to see on my doing this, but I like it. I mean, you've thought about a lot of different factors. I personally, like with the tempos, I personally don't prescribe the tempos as strictly as you do. There are times I'll do tempo work and times I just don't prescribe the tempo at all.
Yeah, most of the time, I might even do longer tempos or even isometrics just to challenge them a little bit better and kind of just throw a little different stimulus in there. And because I mean, for negatives or eccentric, I personally love them for teaching proper form. Because like even when I squat on negative, sometimes I can feel my body get into its natural proper positioning. And then after that, I like to kick it up with the kids. So
Patterning.
Yeah, that's to me, the biggest benefit of tempo work is that. There's a lot of carryover to tendons and joints and ligaments and decelerative parts of your body, but I love just the fact that you are forcing these athletes to maintain, because holding an 8-second squat, if you're not holding it the right way at any point in that 8 seconds, you're going to fail and it's going to feel bad. That's such a huge part of the eccentrics that I think is often overlooked, because a lot of people talk about like that it enhances tendon strength and ligament strength and stuff like that, but it also just makes them lift in the right way, and it reinforces great movement patterns and knowing their body in every part of that movement pattern and how they have to shift and adjust and slightly move here and there to make that movement work for them as the individual, rather than the structured, here's how you should squat, here's how you should bench. There is a general movement pattern that you have to complete, but you also have to make sure that you're fitting the movement pattern to them.
It's more like self-learning or self-analysis for that process, and have them learn it, because they're going to learn it better if they understand it and how they move. And I think that's an important thing to note outside of like coaching realm, but with new people in the weight room in general. Like when I started working out, if I would have done more eccentric type work, would it have been more beneficial for me to learn those things early? Obviously, without, you know what I mean? Pattern them early. Right. Basically.
Yeah, no,
proud of them properly before I really learned more about the the strength and conditioning side of movement with, proper form and technique, essentially is what I'm saying. Like I just went in and I bench pressed. I didn't know anything, but if I would have like slowed it down or like understood a little bit, like I think it would have been a really greit learning tool for a beginner as well to understand tempos. And I think it's overlooked a lot. So I like having them in there just so people think about it.
Right. Well, I mean, it looks cooler to bench 225 than it is to slowly bench 95.
Yeah.
Right.
So even though it's not going to be as
What
beneficial.
if you can slowly bench 225?
Well, listen, I'm not there yet, all right? I'm that slow 95 still.
Jesse, do you remember when I was at St. Francis, when it was my last spring there, I was really toying with like the triphasic training and doing triphasic stuff but making it undulated and not doing strict phases and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The more I bring that up and I talk about that, and the more I look back on it to kind of like take like the notes I made on it and stuff, the more I realized that, yeah, they got really strong, and like my group got really strong doing that, but it wasn't because they got strong. It's because, yeah, they got a little bit strong, but they learned how to move. When you do a tempo clean, if you do a 6-second pull on a clean, you're going to know exactly where that barbell is in relation to your shins and know how to move your knee back and back underneath the barbell the right way to be able to complete that clean. So that way, when you do a clean at full speed, you just ingrained a brand new, more perfect movement pattern.
Right. And a 6-second pull is brutal.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know who I thought I was.
Did you go through the workouts too, or did you just torture them?
Yeah, I did it. I did it with them like almost every day. Not like with them physically, but like the same day, like I would lift like during my downtime. Yeah, that was, and my numbers went through the roof. Like that was the first time I ever hang cleaned 300 pounds, was because I just got good at moving.
Yeah.
That's awesome. 6-second pull is disgusting.
Yeah. 6-second pull to your hang position.
Right.
And then you have to finish the clean after that.
Gross.
Yeah. Cardio. Talk about cardio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also talk about the amount of bracing that they learned how to do, because otherwise they would be crumbling underneath that load just to maintain the posture.
So I want to just add one more thing into the talk about periodization. And you guys talked a little bit about testing, but didn't really kind of go after it. So the longer I've done this, the more I've realized that your testing can be just worked into your program. And I think, Dennis, you mentioned something about that in there. Not that you wouldn't do dedicated testing days, because there's something about a testing environment, or today's a test day, and it kind of gets that, like game day feel. But you can know where somebody is just by programming properly and then watching, and John and Scott, Team Builder, you can click on that PR at any time and see a graph of their movement,
Mm-hmm.
In real time, how they've been progressing with their PR. But John, you said you like a 3RM. I've noticed a really productive way of doing that is to tell them whatever Team Builder says their max is. I program as many reps as possible at 95%. And typically they will get 2 or 3. I mean, 95% is about a 2-rep max. So, if they get 3 reps, then that will bump their max up. If they get 2 reps, then they're where you thought they were. And I've just found that to be a really useful tool, just as many as possible at 95, because it's not a 100%. So it's a little bit safer, like you were talking about, John, but it also takes a lot of guesswork out.
Mm-hmm.
But every once in a while you get people doing like 10 reps and you're like, where did that come from? And so now you know they were sandbagging.
Yeah, because when we had our pitchers program over the wintertime, we did a 3 rep max in the beginning of hex bar deadlift, just so they can get bases to go off of. And then after the 8 weeks, which I think ended up being 10 weeks just because of the holidays, we had them retest at the same weight for as many as they can, just to kind of let them see what like an actual strength program does. And the one kid went like 27 reps at his old max. I'm like, well, so let's learn from this. Let's understand that you probably didn't get that much stronger in 8 weeks. That
Right.
it's just.
I think it's a good point to make though too, is that like when you see that, like then those people, you can't even begin to prescribe a new max, because like there is no formula to tell me that 27 reps at X weight gives you a max of this. Like,
right. Yeah. The math doesn't work at that point.
Yeah.
But I think what you see in that 8 weeks is they've learned, I mean, we've repeated it a million times. They've learned how to move, that type of thing, but also learned what their capabilities are.
It's a confidence boost.
Right. Like they would have never imagined that 8 weeks ago. And now they're like, oh, well, I've been doing this. I know what I'm doing. I know how to move it. I know what it feels like. I know what heavy weight feels like. And it's just a total paradigm shift for them in their mind, not just in their body, talking about the software versus hardware that we talked in the beginning. But
yeah, no, and I think that's a good point to make too, just because like at the end of the day too, as strength coaches, yeah, we want to increase athleticism, but building confidence in our athletes is a massive part of what we do. Yeah. And the more confident your athlete is, the more they're going to give for you, the more they're going to trust themselves to go the extra mile, to do that little bit extra, to hit one more rep, because then that's going to translate to them giving a little bit more on the field, being able to beat out the throw at first. Like it's going to like, it translates, and having confidence is a massive part of what we do. And I think it's often overlooked from strength coaches, because we're so worried about you need this amount of sets, this amount of reps at this weight. Yeah, that's important. Don't get me wrong, but we have to also know that, especially with like I always talk about with female athletes. Female athletes, they don't know how strong they really are until you teach them and you give them the opportunity to show how strong they really are. Because if I say 200 pounds to an incoming freshman, I see their eyes light up. I'm saying, hey, you're going to have a 200-pound squat. They're like, yeah, right. But then give me 2 years. And then all of a sudden you're going to be throwing around 200 pounds being like, hey, Coach K, I want more. And just because they got more confident in the fact that what they're doing is working, and that there is no secret juice. It's just showing up every day and just doing it.
Right. Have you ever heard the attitude shift of changing have to get to?
Yeah.
Like,
yes. 100%. I do that all day.
I don't have to go lift. I get to go lift.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of an inadvertent shift for those athletes. Like going back to the example of the person that was able to then do it 27 times. Like in the beginning, they're like, oh, I have to max out. And then by the end,
Right.
I get to do this. Like I get to do it as many times as I can, you know?
Yeah. Huge part about coaching is getting them fired up and getting them excited about what they're doing every day, every single day.
Yeah. I tell them all the time, like my athletes, I'm like, look, I love the weight room. I love it. That's why I chose this profession. You don't have to love it, but you have to understand that it's going to work for you, and it's going to be great for you in the long run. And then you have people that graduate, or they text you a year after they graduate, like, oh man, Coach, I can't wait to hit the weight room anymore. Like it's my favorite thing in the world to do. Like if I go a day without lifting, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. And I'm like, this is coming from the same guy that I was on them every day. That when I saw him walking around on the quad, I'm like, hey, you got lift today. Make sure you be there. And you're like, oh God, Coach. And then now all of a sudden you're like, no, I have to go lift because I want to go lift, because I get to go lift. And
right. It's powerful, really powerful. It's a good, powerful of the power of a good coach for real.
I think one last thing I wanted to touch on was just rewinding a little bit to what Jesse said about not necessarily like there is something special about a test day. Like, don't get me wrong, I love a test day because the juice is just rocking. You can feel it when you walk into the room that it's just there's a buzz, right? But something that I've been doing a lot now is we do what I call money sets. So they're set at a programmed weight that if they get 3 or more reps at it, then it automatically bumps their max. And it's already pre-programmed and it's accounted for. But if they get 3 or more reps, then it bumps their max. And it gives me a way to, because at the end, on the flip side of things, they might personally, with other stresses in their life, might not be ready for max day on that week. And the week before, it might have been the week that they were peaked, that they were primed and ready to go. And then you go to week 12, your testing week, and then they had a death in the family. They had 2 exams that week. Like, it just wasn't their time to test.
Yeah, that hit me, a couple times when I had the strict test days, and guys would be like, but I hit that last week. And I'm like, oh, today's test day. This is what counts. And then after doing that a couple times, I'm like, well, why? Why am I sticking to, no, this is test week? Like, if you hit it, you hit it.
Yeah.
If it was last, like, we all know that, your body's up and down. And just because you're not 100% on test day doesn't mean you're not that strong. And we're wanting the numbers, since we're wanting the numbers, not just to stroke our ego, but to program off of and track development. Like, there's so many other reasons for the number. Then we want an accurate number, not just what I could do on that particular day.
You can't achieve anything if you can't measure results. Period.
Smart goal, man. It has to be specific and measurable.
That's right. So it all comes back to that.
And that's a good final point to make, though, too, is that, like, at the end of the day, like, we have to realize that we're not doing these testing, we're not periodizing these things, however we decide to periodize them, just to stroke our egos. It's because there is a science to this, and there is a method to what we're trying to do. Right. Now, John and Jesse and Scott and myself all might do it 4 different ways, but the principles are what we're talking about. They remain the same. And it's not to make us be like, oh, I'm the best strength coach in the world because I have the most people that can squat 500 pounds, because that doesn't equate to wins, right? But making sure that there's a science to it so that way we can continue to develop and then build more confidence and build a better relationship with our athletes and build a better connection to the weight room and how it's decreasing our injury rates and all these other things that are really what we're trying to get out of getting these numbers.
Right. And they become milestones towards whatever that people are trying to achieve too.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Good words. I think that's a mic drop.
It's a good way to end it right there.